It was a bright and sunny afternoon in the heart of the city, where life moved at a fast pace, and people were busy rushing to their destinations. Among them was a billionaire, a man whose life seemed perfect in every way. He was known for his wealth, his luxurious lifestyle, and his extravagant tastes. From the outside, it looked like he had everything anyone could ever dream of: expensive cars, high-end clothes, fine dining, and private jets. His life was the picture of success and comfort. Yet, despite all this luxury, there was something ordinary about him as he walked down the busy street that day. People passing by hardly noticed him because he was just another face in the crowd, but those who looked closely might have sensed a sense of confidence and calm that came naturally to someone used to having control over his world. He had decided to take a break from his usual routine, leaving behind the quiet and exclusive halls of his office and the private rooms of his mansion. He wanted to enjoy something simple, a meal outdoors in a bustling part of the city. The irony of it was not lost on him. A man who could afford the world had chosen to eat at a regular cafe, where anyone could walk in and sit. Perhaps it was a desire to experience life outside the walls of his wealth, to feel the energy of ordinary people, the sounds of chatter, the aroma of freshly cooked food, and the little surprises that came with living among strangers. The city was alive with movement, children playing on the sidewalks, street vendors calling out to passers-by, and the faint sound of traffic in the distance. Each sound and sight reminded him that life was unpredictable, no matter how controlled he tried to make it. As he approached the cafe, he noticed the variety of people around him. Office workers were hurrying past with lunch boxes in hand, tourists were taking pictures and laughing, and street performers were entertaining small crowds with music and dance. Among all this, he spotted a young homeless girl sitting quietly on the edge of the sidewalk. Her clothes were tattered, and her face showed signs of exhaustion, yet there was a spark in her eyes, a silent story waiting to be told. For a brief moment, their worlds intersected: the billionaire, a man of immense wealth, and the homeless girl, a young soul struggling to survive. The contrast was striking, and it made him pause for just a second, something he rarely did. He walked into the cafe and chose a table near the window, one that offered a clear view of the busy street outside. He wanted to enjoy the sunlight and the feeling of being part of the city's rhythm. Unaware to him, the homeless girl had been watching from afar, her gaze following him as he entered. She was hungry, and the smell of food from the cafe seemed almost unbearable. Each plate that passed by reminded her of the meals she had missed over the last few days. Her stomach grumbled quietly. And for a moment, her eyes lingered on the billionaire's table. He sat down, placed his expensive watch on the table, and unwrapped his meal, oblivious to the fact that someone nearby was watching every move he made with careful attention. Life had a way of arranging coincidences in unexpected ways, and sometimes, even a brief moment could change the course of events for both people involved. That day, the billionaire was about to experience something he had never imagined, a situation that would shock him and challenge everything he thought he knew about people and the world around him. The calm and luxurious afternoon was about to turn into an unforgettable encounter, something that would make him question his assumptions about wealth, generosity, and human nature. As he took his first bite, the young girl slowly approached, her steps cautious but determined. The city continued around them, unaware that a small act of desperation was about to collide with immense wealth. That simple lunch, meant to be peaceful and routine, was about to become a life-changing moment. For the billionaire, it would be a shocking lesson about humility and compassion. For the girl, it would be a small, daring step toward survival. And in that ordinary city street, under the bright afternoon sun, the stage was set for an extraordinary event, one that neither the billionaire nor the homeless girl could have predicted, a moment that would capture the attention of onlookers, spread across social media, and remind everyone watching that life could be unpredictable, dramatic, and deeply human. In the middle of the bustling city, two worlds were about to collide, and what seemed like a simple afternoon lunch would turn into a story that no one would forget. The cafe was alive with energy, a small oasis of calm surrounded by the constant movement of the city streets. People laughed, argued, and chatted over steaming cups of coffee. Servers moved quickly between tables, balancing trays filled with colorful plates, and the smell of fresh bread, sizzling meat, and sweet desserts filled the air. It was the kind of place where lives intersected, where people from different worlds unknowingly shared the same space. At one table sat the billionaire. Carefully setting his silver cutlery and glancing at his meticulously prepared meal, the sunlight glinted off his watch and the polished surface of the table, a symbol of the life he had worked so hard to build. Around him, the world carried on, unaware of the storm about to unfold. On the edge of the sidewalk, just outside the cafe's glass doors, the homeless girl sat on the cold pavement, hugging her knees. Her clothes were thin and worn, and her shoes had holes, exposing her tired feet to the rough concrete. Despite her situation, there was a quiet determination in her eyes, a kind of bravery that only those who have faced hardship truly understand. She had learned to survive in a world that often ignored her, and she was always alert, watching, waiting, and calculating. Each step, today, her gaze was fixed on the billionaire's table, the food laid out in front of him looking almost too beautiful to touch, yet her hunger was stronger than hesitation, and she edged closer, her movements careful so as not to attract attention. The street outside was a mix of chaos and charm, as city life always is. Vendors called out their products, offering everything from fresh fruit to handmade trinkets. Street musicians played upbeat tunes, filling the space between cars honking and pedestrians chatting. Tourists wandered with cameras, snapping photos of the city's architecture, completely oblivious to the smaller, hidden stories happening on the sidewalks. The contrast between the billionaire and the homeless girl could not have been more extreme. He was the embodiment of privilege, she the embodiment of struggle, and yet, somehow, in this crowded, noisy city, they shared the same small patch of reality. Inside the cafe, the billionaire ate slowly, savoring each bite. He enjoyed people watching and observing the rhythm of life around him, yet he had never paid attention to someone like her before, someone whose world existed entirely on the margins, someone who was invisible to most, but whose eyes now followed him with quiet intensity. The servers bustled past, the other patrons laughed and talked, and for a moment, it seemed as though time slowed down just for the girl and the billionaire. Tension hung in the air, subtle but powerful, an unspoken story waiting to unfold. The homeless girl shifted slightly, balancing herself as she prepared to move closer. She noticed the way the sunlight hit the billionaire's table, how the food glistened and how he seemed completely unaware of her presence. In her mind, she weighed the risks. She had taken chances before, but nothing like this. Her stomach growled, reminding her that survival often required bold choices, and she stepped forward, each movement deliberate, careful not to draw too much attention. Meanwhile, the billionaire took another bite, savoring the flavors and thinking about the deals he had made that morning, about the meetings he had attended, and the constant responsibilities that came with managing his empire. Yet, in that moment, he was completely immersed in the simple act of eating, not realizing that an unexpected challenge to his carefully ordered life was approaching from just a few feet away. The girl's presence was barely noticeable, yet it carried a weight that neither of them could predict. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of food and the sounds of the street. It was as if the city itself was setting the stage for what was about to happen. Every passerby, every car, every laugh and shout became background music to the drama about to unfold. And in this ordinary city street, in a cafe full of ordinary people, two very different lives were on a collision course. Each step the homeless girl took brought them closer together, and with each passing second, the tension in the air grew. No one could have imagined that what started as a simple lunch on a sunny afternoon would turn into a moment that would shock the billionaire, challenge his perspective, and remind everyone watching that life could change in an instant. In this busy city, amidst laughter, chatter, and movement, the extraordinary was quietly preparing to break through the ordinary. The moment had finally arrived, though neither the billionaire nor the homeless girl fully realized how life-changing it would be. She had been watching him eat for what felt like an eternity, her stomach twisting with hunger, each bite he took making her crave food more intensely. Her mind raced with possibilities, and she knew that if she didn't act now, she might go hungry for another long, unbearable day. Her hands shook slightly, not from fear but from anticipation, and she took a careful step toward the table, blending with the movement of the crowd, hoping no one would notice her approach. The billionaire was still enjoying his meal, oblivious to the shadow moving closer. He took a sip of his drink, glanced at his phone, and adjusted his posture, perfectly content in his bubble of wealth and comfort. Around him, people continued to chat, servers moved past, and the city carried on as if nothing extraordinary was about to happen. But the girl's eyes were fixed, unblinking, on his plate. On the food he was about to finish, hunger had sharpened her focus, and the world around her seemed to fade, leaving only the opportunity in front of her. As she reached the edge of the table, the tension in the air became almost tangible. The billionaire noticed a flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye but dismissed it as another passerby, completely unaware that this ordinary-looking girl was about to do something so unexpected that it would shock him to his core. Then, in one swift, almost instinctive movement, she snatched a portion of his food and threw it away. The plate had barely been touched by her hands, yet it was enough to cause a ripple of disbelief through the cafe. Gasps filled the air around them, and several nearby customers froze, their meals momentarily forgotten. The billionaire's fork paused mid-air, his eyes widening as he tried to process what had just happened. A mixture of shock, anger, and confusion flashed across his face. He had never imagined someone would have the audacity to take food from him, let alone throw it away. The audacity, the boldness, and the sheer unexpectedness of the act left him momentarily speechless. The girl, on the other hand, didn't run away. She stood there for a moment, her breathing heavy, not out of fear but because her actions had been calculated and precise. Her eyes met his for the first time, and in that gaze was a story that needed no words: hunger, struggle, survival. It all stared back at him from her small, determined frame. It was a silent confrontation, a collision of two very different worlds, and the billionaire felt an unfamiliar, uneasy feeling stirring inside him. Around them, life seemed to slow down. Even though the city continued to buzz, people whispered to each other, some reaching for their phones to capture the shocking moment, others simply watched, their curiosity and disbelief mixing with amusement and concern. The air was thick with tension, and for the first time that day, the billionaire felt a sense of vulnerability, something he rarely experienced in his controlled, wealthy life. He leaned back slightly, trying to understand what had just occurred. His mind raced through questions he had never asked himself before. Why did she do it? Was it an act of desperation? Was it a plea for attention? Or was it something else entirely? The girl, still standing, waited silently, almost daring him to respond. To her, this wasn't about anger or theft, it was about survival, about a small chance to claim a moment of life in a world that had taken so much from her. And in that brief encounter, the ordinary afternoon transformed into a moment of drama, suspense, and raw humanity. The cafe, the city, the other people, they all became part of a scene that could have belonged in a movie, yet it was real, painfully real. The billionaire was forced to confront something he rarely faced in his life, a reminder that money could not protect him from the unexpected, that power and wealth could not prevent life from throwing him into unpredictable situations. The encounter, as brief as it seemed, had already begun to change both of them. He now looked at her not just as a homeless girl but as a person with a story, with needs, fears, and courage, and she, in her own small way, had taken a stand, not just for food but for acknowledgement, for survival, and for the fragile humanity that connects everyone. In the midst of a busy city, in a cafe full of strangers, a moment of true human confrontation had occurred, and its impact would be felt long after. The plates were cleared and the crowd dispersed. The moment stretched for a heartbeat, then another, and the billionaire finally realized what had just happened. His fork hovered awkwardly in the air, half filled with food, as his mind struggled to process the scene before him. For a split second, he couldn't even speak. His perfectly ordered world had been interrupted in the most unexpected way, and the reality of it left him feeling strangely off balance. Around him, whispers began to ripple through the cafe, and people's heads turned toward the commotion. Some covered their mouths in surprise, while others pulled out their phones, sensing a story unfolding that was too unusual to ignore. His eyes locked on the homeless girl, who stood just a few feet away, her small frame trembling slightly but her gaze unwavering. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. She had acted out of necessity, out of hunger, but also out of a raw courage that the billionaire had never encountered before. His initial shock quickly transformed into a mix of disbelief and anger. How could someone just walk up and throw away his meal? How could someone dare challenge him in this way, in front of everyone? The thought of it made him clench his jaw, his heartbeat quickening in a way that felt foreign to him. The bystanders watched with a mixture of curiosity and tension, sensing that something bigger was happening than just a stolen meal. There was an unspoken drama in the air, a quiet intensity that made even the servers pause for a moment. One of them accidentally dropped a tray, the clatter of plates amplifying the moment, and it seemed as if time itself had slowed down in a small corner of the cafe. The billionaire finally spoke, his voice firm but uncertain. "Why did you do that?" he asked. The words more controlled than he felt. His mind raced with questions, some practical, some moral, none of them with easy answers. The homeless girl didn't immediately respond, her eyes flicking briefly to the discarded food before returning to his gaze. She could see the shock and anger in him, but she also noticed a flicker of something else, a hesitation, a crack in the armor of wealth and privilege that he had built around himself. She shifted slightly, unsure if she had gone too far or not far enough, but she stayed grounded, knowing that this was her moment to survive, to assert herself in a world that often ignored her. For the billionaire, the seconds felt like minutes, each one filled with a strange tension. His life had been meticulously planned, from business meetings to luxurious vacations, and yet here he was, confronted by something completely out of his control. The feeling was both uncomfortable and oddly enlightening. He had never faced such unpredictability, never had his sense of order challenged so directly. It forced him to pause, to reflect, even as his emotions swirled like a storm inside him. Around them, the cafe had become a theater of quiet suspense. Every patron sensed that they were witnessing something unusual, something real and unfiltered, something that didn't belong in the glossy, polished stories of wealth and success. People exchanged glances, some leaning forward, eager to see how the encounter would unfold. Others whispered softly, sharing their own judgments or sympathies, and a few simply watched in stunned silence, feeling the tension in the air without fully understanding it. The billionaire's anger began to soften as he studied the girl more closely, noticing the lines of struggle etched into her face, the roughness of her hands, the way she held herself despite her obvious vulnerability. There was a story in her eyes, one that went far beyond a simple act of taking and throwing food. It was a story of hunger, of survival, of life on the edge, and for the first time that day, he saw a reality he had never had to face directly. His initial shock gave way to a complex mixture of feelings: surprise, frustration, empathy, and curiosity. He realized that this was more than just an unusual moment. It was a lesson wrapped in a single act, a reminder that life could be unpredictable, raw, and entirely beyond his control. And in that quiet, crowded cafe, a powerful tension lingered, one that would shape the moments to come. As both the billionaire and the homeless girl faced each other across the table of fate, each wondering how the story would end. The cafe fell into a hush around them. Though the city outside continued its chaotic rhythm, it was as if the world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The billionaire, still recovering from the shock of the girl snatching and throwing his food, leaned forward slightly, his expression softening as he tried to understand her. His voice, though steady, carried a mix of curiosity and concern. "Why did you do that?" he asked again, this time with less anger and more genuine interest. He wanted to hear the answer, to understand the reasoning behind an act so bold it had left him frozen moments earlier. The homeless girl shifted her weight, her eyes flicking down to the ground for a brief second before meeting his gaze. Her voice was quiet at first, hesitant, as if she had rarely been asked such a question with sincerity. I didn't have any food," she admitted, her words simple but heavy with meaning. "I was hungry, and I didn't know what else to do." She didn't try to justify her actions as right or wrong, she only stated the truth, raw and unfiltered, and in that moment, the billionaire began to see her not as a problem or a criminal, but as a human being, struggling to survive. He paused, absorbing her words, his mind replayed the scene, the discarded food, the shock in the cafe, and now, her honest confession. Something inside him shifted, a mix of empathy and disbelief. He realized that hunger had pushed her to an act he had initially seen as audacious or disrespectful, but it wasn't disrespect, it was necessity, a reminder of the fragility of life for those who had so little. The contrast between their worlds had never been so clear. He had the luxury of choice, she had none. Around them, the cafe continued to murmur softly, but the energy had changed. The other patrons, who had been leaning in curiously, now watched silently, sensing a rare, human moment unfolding. A few exchanged quiet comments, acknowledging the bravery it took for her to speak the truth so openly. The servers moved carefully around the table, unsure whether to intervene or simply let the moment play out naturally. The billionaire leaned back slightly, studying her face more closely. He noticed the fine lines of exhaustion, the dirt on her clothes, and the weariness in her eyes, yet despite everything, she held herself with quiet dignity, refusing to shrink or apologize unnecessarily. There was pride in her stance, a resilience that he couldn't help but admire. It was clear she had faced life's harshest challenges, and even in a moment of desperation, she hadn't lost herself completely. I didn't mean to upset you, she said after a pause, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. She seemed unsure of what his reaction would be, fearing anger or ridicule, but he didn't respond with harsh words. He simply nodded, acknowledging her honesty, and allowing her truth to exist without judgment. The tension in the air began to shift from confrontation to understanding, and something remarkable happened. An unspoken connection formed between them, fragile yet powerful. He asked her a few more questions gently, wanting to know her story. Where are you staying? Have you had food recently? Is there anything you need right now? Each question was asked with genuine care, and each answer revealed more about her struggles, her life on the streets, and the daily challenges she faced. It was a conversation he had never expected to have, yet it was grounding, humbling, and oddly enlightening. The confrontation, which had begun as a shocking, almost aggressive act, had transformed into a moment of empathy and understanding. It wasn't about blame or punishment anymore. It was about human connection, about seeing beyond appearances, beyond wealth and poverty, to the very core of what it meant to survive, to struggle, to make choices in impossible circumstances, and to confront the consequences of those choices in the presence of someone who had never faced hunger like she had. By the time the conversation ended, the cafe felt different, almost transformed. The billionaire's shock had given way to contemplation, and the girl's fear had been replaced with a cautious sense of relief. In a few short minutes, what started as an encounter of conflict had become a shared experience, one that neither of them would forget. And though the world outside the cafe continued its chaos, inside that small space, a remarkable human story had begun to unfold, a story of confrontation turning into understanding. After the initial confrontation, the billionaire sat back in his chair, his mind racing. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of humility, a feeling that was both unfamiliar and strangely refreshing. He looked out the window at the bustling city streets, at the people walking by, and suddenly he noticed things he had never paid attention to before: the worn shoes of a passerby, the tired eyes of a street vendor, the children laughing despite their tattered clothes, all around him. Life continued, but now it seemed more fragile, more real, more human. He thought about the homeless girl, her boldness, her courage, and the desperation that had driven her to snatch his food. At first, he had felt anger, even outrage, but now he saw her differently. He realized that hunger could push anyone to act in ways they would normally never imagine. It was a stark reminder of how different lives could be, how unfair the world could feel, and how easily someone's circumstances could shape their choices. He had money, power, and privilege, yet she had survived without any of it, and somehow, that made her strength even more remarkable. As he reflected, memories of his own life flashed in his mind, times when he had faced challenges, moments of stress and pressure, but he realized that his problems had always been different, calculated, manageable, cushioned by wealth and resources. He had never known true desperation, never gone hungry, never had to rely on strangers or luck for survival. This encounter forced him to see a world he had long ignored, a world that existed outside his comfortable bubble, and it stirred something deep inside him. The billionaire's reflection wasn't just about empathy, it was also about self-awareness. He thought about how easily people could judge others without understanding their struggles, how quick society was to label and dismiss those who were less fortunate. The girl's courage made him question the way he had viewed the world, the assumptions he had made about people, and even the meaning of wealth itself. Was money only about comfort and status, or could it be a tool to make a real difference? To help those who needed it most, his mind turned over these questions repeatedly, and for the first time in years, he didn't have ready answers. He thought about the act itself, the simple but shocking gesture of snatching and throwing food. At first, he had seen it as disrespect, but now he saw it as a form of communication, a desperate plea, a human cry for attention and help. He realized that life often sent messages in unexpected ways, and it was up to those who were able to listen, to understand, and to respond. The girl hadn't asked for money or gifts outright, she had acted instinctively, forcing him to confront reality, forcing him to step out of his comfort zone. The more he reflected, the more he felt a sense of responsibility, not just toward this girl, but toward others like her. He wondered how many people in the city lived each day in fear, in hunger, in uncertainty, while the rest of the world walked by, oblivious. He felt a growing determination to do something meaningful, to use his wealth and resources in ways that truly mattered, to make a difference beyond the walls of his mansion, the boardrooms of his businesses, and the public praise of society. And yet, amid these reflections, he also felt a strange gratitude for the lesson he had been given, for the reminder that life was unpredictable and full of moments that could teach him humility and compassion. For the first time, he saw the value in being present, in paying attention to people's stories, in understanding that wealth was not only a measure of success but also a tool to create change. The encounter with the homeless girl had cracked open his worldview, and in that crack, he saw possibilities he had never imagined. As the city continued its noisy rhythm outside, he sat quietly, thinking about the girl, about life, and about the choices that defined who he was and who he wanted to become. This reflection was more than introspection, it was a turning point, a moment where shock transformed into understanding, and understanding into the desire to act. He realized that true wealth wasn't just in money or status, but in empathy, kindness, and the ability to impact lives in ways that mattered, and for the first time, he felt ready to step into that role, to become more than a billionaire, to become a human being who could make a difference. After sitting in quiet reflection, the billionaire finally moved, his decision firm in his mind. He had thought long and hard about what had just happened, about the courage and desperation of the young homeless girl, and about his own role in this unexpected encounter. The shock he had first felt had evolved into empathy, and empathy had transformed into a determination to act. He realized that true understanding required more than thought, it required action. He stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment, and approached the girl, who watched him cautiously, unsure if he would respond with anger or indifference. Her eyes flickered with both fear and hope. Sensing that this was no ordinary reaction, the billionaire knelt slightly to meet her gaze at eye level, signaling that he was not there to intimidate her, but to connect. "I want to help," he said gently. And the words hung in the air like a promise, simple yet powerful. The girl blinked, unsure how to respond at first. Her life had been filled with people who looked away, who judged without understanding, and who offered nothing but words or empty sympathy. But here was someone from a completely different world, someone with wealth, influence, and power, who was extending a hand without judgment. The sincerity in his eyes was clear, and for the first time in a long while, she felt seen, truly seen. He offered her something more than food. He offered her hope, a tangible path to safety and stability. He arranged for her to have a hot meal immediately, warm clothing to replace her tattered ones, and a place to sleep for the night. But he didn't stop there. He knew that these were temporary solutions, band-aids for a life that required deeper care, so he also connected her with local shelters, counseling resources, and programs designed to help people get back on their feet. His approach was deliberate, thoughtful, and practical, ensuring that she could begin to rebuild her life in a sustainable way. The girl accepted the help cautiously at first. Her pride and independence had always been her shields, and she wasn't used to being offered assistance without strings attached. But he listened to her, patiently, respectfully, giving her a voice in decisions about her own future. The trust between them grew slowly, like water seeping into dry soil, and she began to allow herself to believe that someone genuinely cared about her well-being. As the afternoon passed, he didn't simply give her money or gifts and walk away. He stayed long enough to understand her story more fully, to hear about her struggles on the streets, the nights spent hungry, the days spent searching for small ways to survive, and the constant fight to maintain dignity in a world that often overlooked her. The billionaire felt a mixture of emotions, sadness for the hardships she had endured, admiration for the resilience she had shown, and inspiration to do more than just a simple act of charity. By the time the day drew to a close, a subtle transformation had taken place. The girl's eyes, once filled with suspicion and weariness, now reflected a cautious hope, and the billionaire's heart had opened to a side of life he had rarely confronted. The encounter had become more than just an act of generosity, it had become a bridge between two worlds, a reminder that humanity could transcend wealth, status, and circumstance. Before leaving, the billionaire promised to check in regularly, to support her progress, and to help her access opportunities that could change the trajectory of her life. It was an action born not from guilt or obligation, but from understanding, compassion, and the recognition that even a single gesture could ripple outward in ways that mattered. And as they parted that evening, the city outside continued to move at its usual frantic pace, but for these two lives, the world had shifted. The impossible had become possible, and a moment of shock had been transformed into a lasting impact. In that quiet, profound moment, he realized that wealth was not just a measure of success, but a responsibility, and that true change often begins with a single courageous decision to act. And for the girl, it was the beginning of a journey, one that promised safety, dignity, and the chance to rebuild her life. A story that began with food snatched in desperation had evolved into something far greater. A testament to the power of human connection, compassion, and action. The city streets buzzed as usual, cars honking, people chatting, and life moving at its relentless pace, yet inside the cafe, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the extraordinary encounter, something had changed. The billionaire sat quietly at his table, reflecting on everything that had just unfolded. The homeless girl, now wrapped in the warmth of a borrowed coat and a full stomach, sat across from him, her eyes no longer wary but filled with cautious hope. The encounter that began with shock and confrontation had transformed into something far deeper, a story of humanity, understanding, and the unexpected power of connection. He realized that life could be unpredictable in the most extraordinary ways, that a single, seemingly small event could open the doors to reflection, action, and lasting change. The shock he had felt when the girl snatched his food had forced him to pause, to think, and to see the world differently. It had reminded him that wealth, privilege, and status were not shields against the raw realities of life, and that compassion was a currency far more valuable than money alone. The girl, for her part, felt something shift within her as well. She had faced countless moments of rejection, isolation, and struggle, and yet here was someone from a completely different world, someone powerful and wealthy, who had seen her, listened to her, and taken steps to help her. It wasn't charity, it was recognition, validation, and a chance to rebuild, a chance she had not expected, but one she would seize with every ounce of courage she possessed. As the afternoon turned to evening, the billionaire and the girl walked together toward the exit, blending into the city crowd, yet carrying with them the quiet weight of what had happened. Each step felt significant, not because of distance traveled, but because of the emotional journey they had shared. They had crossed invisible boundaries, broken down walls of fear and misunderstanding, and created a moment that neither would ever forget. The billionaire thought about the people he had seen that day, the street vendors, the pedestrians, the children playing on the sidewalks. He understood now that life for many was a constant struggle, and that even small gestures could have immense impact. He resolved to use his resources not just for his own comfort, but to make a tangible difference in the lives of those who had been overlooked, forgotten, or left behind. He realized that wealth alone was meaningless if it could not bring positive change, and that human connection was the true measure of success. The girl, meanwhile, felt a spark of possibility ignite within her, something she had not felt in years. For the first time, she saw that her future did not have to be dictated solely by hunger, fear, and survival. There was kindness in the world, there was help, and there were people who believed in giving others a chance. She understood that this encounter was not the end, but a beginning. A doorway into a life where hope could exist alongside struggle, and where courage could meet opportunity. As night fell over the city, the lights twinkled like tiny promises scattered across the streets. The billionaire returned to his mansion later that evening, not with a sense of accomplishment over business deals or financial gain, but with a quiet fulfillment born from making a real difference. The girl rested in a safe place, her stomach full, her heart lighter, her mind alive with new possibilities, and somewhere in the bustling city, life continued. But for these two lives, everything had changed. This story, born from a shocking act of desperation, had evolved into a powerful lesson about empathy, generosity, and the unexpected ways life teaches us to see beyond ourselves. It reminded anyone who heard it that true wealth is not measured by money alone, but by the kindness we show, the lives we touch, and the courage to act when we see someone in need. The encounter between the billionaire and the homeless girl became more than a moment. It became a symbol of hope, connection, and the transformative power of human understanding. In the end, both of them were changed, not just by the actions taken, but by the lessons learned. A billionaire learned humility, compassion, and the responsibility of wealth. A young girl learned that hope can exist, that people can care, and that life can take unexpected turns for the better. And in a city of millions, on a street filled with strangers, a moment of real humanity had been shared. A moment that would be remembered, cherished, and perhaps inspire others to see the world, and each other, with kinder eyes.